The upcoming panel is titled Navigating Challenges to Social Cohesion. Singapore society has grown more complex and diverse over recent years, which poses challenges to social cohesion. This panel will examine how Singapore can balance diverse needs and interests while ensuring that society is not pulled apart by differences. This panel will be moderated by Associate Professor Razwana Begum, Head of Global Security and Strategy Program at the School of Humanities and Behavioral Sciences, Singapore University of Social Sciences. She will open the panel discussion and introduce the speakers. May I now invite members of the panel on stage, please. Oh, so much stress. Oh, no. Okay, good to go. Turn on my mic for no good reason.
Yeah, that's so
Thank you.
Morning. As societies become more diverse, more digitally connected, and more exposed to global influence, a quiet but important question emerges. What continues to hold people together when differences become more visible and sometimes more contested? And just as importantly, are we paying enough attention to the things that hold us together, even when they are not easily measured? It is in this spirit that I'm pleased to moderate this panel on navigating challenges to social cohesion at Singapore Perspectives 2026. This year's theme, Fraternity, invites us to reflect on the bonds that connect us, not only in moments of harmony, but also in moments of tension and uncertainty. In Singapore, fraternity has never been accidental. As a compact and diverse society, our cohesion has been shaped by close proximity, shared institutions, and an enduring understanding that our futures are deeply intertwined. Beyond policies and laws, this cohesion has been sustained by something less visible but deeply important: social and relational capital, the trust, norms, and relationships that enable people to live and work together. Recent IPS research suggests that while many Singaporeans continue to report a strong sense of national identity and generally positive perception of harmony, social networks are becoming smaller and trust is uneven across groups and generations. The context in which cohesion is built today is also more complex. Domestically, we are navigating demographic change, a more diverse immigrant profile, and emerging social stratification. Digitally, more relationships and disagreements unfold online, where misunderstanding can be amplified and trust is harder to build or repair. Externally, Singapore operates in a more fragmented global environment, even as Singaporeans are increasingly exposed to global ideas and identities. In this environment, cohesion does not sustain itself, it must be intentionally cultivated. Our discussion today is guided by a simple but powerful lens: inclusion as identity, interaction, and collective purpose. We explore this through three complementary perspectives: national leadership, research, and community practice. Recognizing that social cohesion is shaped by policy, evidence, and everyday action working together. Let me briefly introduce our panelists. Acting Minister Jeffrey Seow brings the national leadership perspective, framing how Singapore manages multiple identities alongside a shared national identity. Professor Elaine Ho brings the research and evidence perspective, particularly on immigration, identity, and social mixing. and Madam Sharani Hassan brings the community practice perspective, drawing from ground experience in dialogue and engagement on race, religion, and immigration. Together, these perspectives remind us that social cohesion is not the work of any single actor. With that, let me invite Acting Minister Jeffrey Self to begin by offering the national leadership perspective. Singaporeans hold multiple identities, ethnic, religious, and cultural, alongside a shared national identity. From the government's perspective, how do we manage these differences in a way that respects diversity while strengthening a common sense of belonging to Singapore? Minister, please.
Very good morning to everyone. Really happy to be here, see so many friends here. First of all, I want to thank IPS for inviting me to this morning's conference. You know, when first invited to speak about social cohesion, I had to think very hard what I could bring to the discussion. After all, I'm really only 7 months into this new job as a politician, and my current portfolios actually do not directly cover this topic, at least not on the surface. But, you know, I have a good opportunity to not talk about transport issues for a change. So quite refreshing to come and try something new. And more importantly, actually, I have a learning opportunity today from the esteemed panel, you know, Razwana, Elaine, and Sharani, all three experts in this area. Actually, I'm really looking forward to learning from them. And, of course, from all of you too, because just met quite a few of you, and there are many distinguished people in the audience today who are much more equipped to speak about this topic. Now, I'm going to start by saying that I joined politics because I love Singapore. I know it sounds a bit trite, maybe not so trite for this audience because you are here also because you're interested in the future of Singapore, but I joined politics because I love Singapore. I love Singapore because I know I'm lucky to be born here, that I can do all these things and be who I am because of the place I was born in, and if it was a different place, a different system, it would have been a very different outcome. And having this opportunity now to be able to contribute and give back to Singapore, I decided to play my part. And one of the best parts and the most beautiful parts of Singapore is that it is a multiracial, multi-religious, multicultural nation. Many of us, maybe I don't think I'm the exception, we took this for granted growing up. My first day of school in primary 1 was a struggle because I didn't speak any English on the first day. A teacher in her infinite wisdom put a Malay boy on my left and an Indian girl on my right. So my first day was extremely traumatic because I could only use sign language and Hokkien to try to communicate. But it was no bother because in the end we figured it out, and in the end we managed to get through, and now I have many friends from different walks of life. We didn't think anything growing up about having friends of different, races or religions, whether it was work, whether it was school, whether it was my Sunday football team. We're all part of the same group. But over the years, I learned in the course of my work that this was not organic. In fact, it was the outcome of deliberate and conscious effort, and its meaning, racial, religious harmony, that thing, the special thing that we take for granted in Singapore. On this panel, I agree with the premise that Singaporeans hold multiple identities. That we have a national identity, we are Singaporean, but we also have ethnic, religious, linguistic affiliations and others. I'm Chinese, I'm also Buddhist. As I mentioned, I speak Hokkien as my first language. And as I was reminded, because I attended this 125th anniversary of the Fuzhou Association, I'm also Fuzhou in dialect. Although I can't speak it, my parents use it when they don't want me to be hearing what they are saying. But identities, of course, also evolve. Personally, I've become less religious over time, although this is actually in the opposite direction of Singaporean society. And now, because of work, I speak mostly English, although Hokkien comes in useful every now and then. Actually, Mandarin is my third language, but don't tell anyone. With each subsequent generation of Singaporeans, national identity has strengthened. I look at my kids, I know they feel very much more Singaporean, and even then, this is not something to take for granted. An IPS survey, I think 2024, which SM Lee mentioned some time back, over a third of respondents ranked nationality as most important, but 2/3 ranked race, religion, country of origin, etc., as their most important identifier, as the most important part of the identity. So the journey is not complete. Neither is the journey linear. Alternative affiliations are also emerging because of immigration, because of higher inter-ethnic or international marriages, or generally because that Singapore has been an open society for a long time, taking in new ideas, new people, new paradigms. In Singapore, we do want people to preserve these varied and alternative affiliations. We do. For example, food. We love the fact that we have people from all over the world, people who feel affiliations from all over the world. We love the fact that our food is varied and fantastic and multicultural and from different sources. And it's a good example of how what binds us together is not just our commonalities, but it's in fact also our differences. But it is not easy to keep this balance. It's not easy, especially when we are open and connected. It's not easy, especially when we have disagreements and conflict. And it's not easy because Singapore is a small country and we are very easily affected by what happens around us. The government plays a very critical role to maintain social cohesion. Sometimes it is very obvious. We have things like Racial Harmony Day. My kids always complain, you have to do this. HDB ethnic integration policy is another very obvious way of intervention, direct way. And sometimes it is less obvious. But the general approach that the government has is to create common spaces and common conversations. Common spaces is how our people encounter diversity in daily life. And I promise this is the only time I'm going to mention transport, but our housing policies, our neighborhoods, our schools, our parks, our public transport system, our community facilities are designed for people to share, to come together, to live, work, and play together. These common experiences help to build a shared sense of identity. They encourage interaction and mingling across different groups, and this is intentional. And in many HDB estates, you will always have a mosque, a church, and a temple, usually situated close together. And when you have this deliberate mixing strategy across different groups, there will be differences in perspectives from time to time. And so common spaces must also go together with common conversations. This is where we do a lot of work on the ground. The grassroots leaders are absolutely critical. For my constituency in Choa Chu Kang, we have a higher proportion of minorities than elsewhere in Singapore. So we work very hard to make sure that we listen to the ground, that we are able to accommodate different views, and that we are sensitive to the views of different groups. And we create opportunities for groups to hear from one another whenever there's an issue to be discussed or if there's a conflict. We have this thing called harmony circles, which I am not sure if the audience is familiar with, but basically these are curated opportunities for religious leaders to come together with grassroots leaders to build bonds during peacetime. We interact over all sorts of opportunities. Recently, we had a durian party, and I realized I was the only person who had no religion with durian. Everybody else was happily tucking in. And these are opportunities for people to get to know each other during peacetime, so that when conflict arises, there is an existing relationship, there's trust and understanding, and there's the will to work together. So when issues, even when they're outside of our GRC, for instance, the recent issues last year at the mosque in Serangoon and the church in Bukit Timah, the Harmony Circles came together very quickly to mobilize the community, to provide support, and to convey well wishes. At the national level, of course, we take such issues very seriously. I don't need to say too much about that. But our senior politicians, including PM, including SM, we come together very often to do closed-door dialogues with the grassroots leaders. Preserving social cohesion is also an unending task. There will be new fault lines and new divisive forces. I mentioned increased religiosity in Singapore. There's the impact of social media. But I want to highlight one which particularly concerns me and worries me, and that is the demographic realities that Singapore faces. Our TFR is abysmal, it's at 0.94 now, 2024 last year, or rather the year before, far below the replacement rate. And the truth that we have to confront is that immigration is crucial to retain the dynamism of Singaporean society and the economy. But immigration can only go as far as integration allows. And we can only stay open and welcoming to newcomers if we are able to integrate them well. And so I think we need to do a better job with integration, to do more so that we can do more immigration. Let me repeat that in case I mentioned it. We need to do more with integration so that we can do more immigration. And how do we do this? We need to make newcomers feel Singaporean, but also make Singaporeans feel that newcomers are Singaporean. In theory, Singapore is a young immigrant nation. So why is this difficult? Maybe it is because we are young. Maybe it's because we don't feel secure enough about what it means to be Singaporean. And it is natural to have an us and them attitude. It's natural and harder, rather, to forge understanding and trust with newcomers when they come from much more diverse backgrounds than they used to. But I think all sides will have to make an effort, an extra effort. Newcomers need to consciously want to integrate, contribute to the community, abide by our norms, and understand what it means to be Singaporean. And Singaporeans have to be open-minded too, to accept that the identity that we have today will evolve, and to be understanding that it takes time for newcomers to adapt to our local customs and practices. As S. Rajaratnam once said, ultimately, being Singaporean is not about ancestry, it's not about where you are born, but it's about choice, conviction, and contribution. And I believe very strongly in that. As we manage our fundamental fault lines of race and religion, another fault line must be also managed, which is that of income inequality. The government is focused very much on this, and in particular, we work very hard to support lower income groups and to strengthen social mobility. And by supporting those who are more vulnerable, we reduce the risk of social fractures and reinforce the sense that we are all progressing together as one society. But this is an unending task. It is a difficult task, maybe more difficult than it was during my time when I was growing up. In summary, the Singapore identity is complex and evolving, but it also has to be carefully nurtured and managed. But we are focused on this, and I think we are going in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Next, we have our next panelist, Professor Elaine. And her question would be, based on your research into immigration, how do new citizens and immigrants experience identity and belonging in Singapore's multicultural society? And where do you see the main areas of tension and division? Yeah. Professor, please.
May I have the clicker for the slides?
I think it's Eileen. I think it's that one.
Is this one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let's see if it works. Oh, yes, it does. Okay. All right. Morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. Let me share a little bit from my research on immigration developments in Singapore. Nearly 40% of Singapore's 6 million population are foreigners. Compared with Western Europe and North America, Singapore has fewer far-right nativist movements and maintains a public narrative of being open to global talent and diversity.
Was within time.
However, managing social cohesion amidst diversity remains a challenge, as substantial, continuous inflows of diverse migrants can strain perceptions of fairness, national identity, and in everyday interactions, even as these same migrants remain economically necessary for Singapore. What are the key trends in how immigration debates are evolving in Singapore? A review of National Day rally speeches by Singapore's political leaders since 1997 highlight the following trends. Identity is forged, not inherited. The speeches consistently emphasize that being a Singaporean Indian or Singaporean Chinese is a distinct identity forged over generations and different from being a Chinese Chinese or Indian Indian. This is a cornerstone of the national narrative used to explain both the success of integration and the sources of social friction when cultural norms clash. Uncomfortable truths are acknowledged. The National Day rally speeches show that Singapore's leadership does not shy away from discussing ground-level anxieties and frictions caused by immigration. The 2021 speech in particular addressed racism against Indian immigrants. This demonstrates a willingness of political leaders to confront uncomfortable truths and guide public sentiment. The speeches suggest that Singaporeans view the world from a unique vantage point, shaped by a shared history and national narrative. This is distinct from the perspective of their ancestral homelands. Here, I would add that even though Singaporeans are descendants of immigrants, the local born enact fluid, dynamic hierarchies of belonging, differentiating new immigrants from self through moralized framings of who came first and cultural expectations of authentic identity, especially towards co-ethnic newcomers. Frictions arise precisely because of the racial similarity. Multiculturalism as the defining difference. Singaporeans are defined by a unique blend of multiculturalism and egalitarian social norms. New immigrants, even from similar ethnic backgrounds, often come from more homogeneous societies or those with more rigid class structures, creating a cultural gap that requires bridging. The speeches also constantly frame integration as a process requiring effort from both sides. Immigrants are urged to embrace local values and contribute to the community. Simultaneously, Singaporeans are exhorted to be big-hearted and welcoming, reminded that their own forefathers were immigrants. The speeches consistently project a long-term view of integration. While there are calls for immediate mutual effort from both locals and new arrivals, the ultimate solution is seen in the second generation. The combination of the national education system and compulsory national service for the sons of immigrants is presented as the primary engine for turning immigrant families into Singaporean ones. The National Day rally speeches present the official policy and rationale. Other than reviewing the trends, we must of course compare these with ground-level sentiments and personal stories from both Singaporeans and immigrants. This will provide a more complete picture of the social dynamics at play. In 2016, when I first spoke at Singapore Perspectives, I had highlighted research findings which surfaced tension points between new immigrant co-ethnics and local-born Singaporeans. Tensions are not only between locals and foreigners, but can also be within the same ethnic category, which I call co-ethnics, such as Singapore-born Indians and Chinese, towards newer, often wealthier Indian and Chinese immigrants. There are also intra-group distinctions between immigrants with an older wave from the 1990s and 2000s, considering themselves old new immigrants, in Chinese that will be the Lao Xin Yimin, who are better adjusted to life in Singapore and differentiating themselves from the recent younger arrivals, whom they would call the Xin Xin Yimin. Local foreigner tensions arise not only because of material competition, such as over jobs and housing, but also differences in social norms and linguistics. As mentioned earlier, tensions reflect anxieties over the dilution of national identity and claims to hierarchies of belonging. An IPS survey conducted in 2025, as reported by Channel News Asia, found that many Singaporeans agreed that multiculturalism is a core tenet of the national identity, but somewhat paradoxically, a substantial portion also said immigrants are a threat to that identity. 4 in 10 said that the presence of foreigners is a negative influence on the nation's identity, and about 40.2% also felt the same way about new citizens. If we flip the coin to the other side, from the perspective of immigrants, they can feel subjected to stereotyping and prejudice, which can make them less willing to mix with locals. During Singapore Perspectives in 2022, I had cautioned against reinforcing an us versus them dichotomy, noting that Singapore's strengths lies in its openness to plurality. At the leadership and community levels, efforts to improve local foreigner relations include community integration programs by government and grassroots bodies. Some policy examples include the Compass points-based framework, increasing salary ceilings, and using highly selective visas to bring in immigrants. These work alongside the fair consideration framework. In housing policy, a Singapore permanent resident quota has been introduced to ensure social mixing. Nonetheless, anxieties remain on the ground about how resources are distributed equitably, the impacts of immigration on Singapore's identity, and local foreigner relations. More remains also to be done in a super diverse, multicultural society like Singapore, of which I wish to highlight 2 points. First, government speeches today emphasize building a we first society, and these tend to link the we to us as Singaporeans, focusing on a shared national identity, common spaces, and mutual responsibility among citizens. Foreigners appear at the margins of this narrative, acknowledged as part of the social landscape, but they are not centered in the core story of social compact, duty, and reciprocity yet. The language of expanding common space and maintaining multiculturalism presents foreigners as part of the diversity that Singapore must manage constructively, rather than as outsiders to be excluded. With this, I would like to turn attention to a subgroup amongst the foreigner population who have already naturalized to become Singapore citizens or PRs. They are known as foreign-born Singapore residents. Immigrants who came during the 1990s are today in their 60s or older. Foreign-born Singapore residents are aging alongside local-born Singaporeans. Their numbers will grow over time if we think in terms of aggregated aging cohorts. My second point pertains to the intersection of migration and aging policy as these twin population challenges converge in Singapore today. Current integration programs tend to focus on earlier stages of the migration journey, such as upon arrival, adjusting to work and community life, buying a home, and children's schooling. But integration continues into the later life course too, when family structure, life circumstances, and social networks change as immigrants grow older. With this perspectival shift, we should also be asking, are foreign-born Singapore residents, they are already naturalized citizens and Singapore PRs, are they mixing with local-born Singaporeans in the later life stage, or are they retreating into predominantly family-centered and co-migrant networks after they retire from the workforce? If they are aging in primarily family-centered or co-migrant networks only, are they receiving the health and elder care information and resources being disseminated through active aging centers and the Age Well Neighborhood Initiative? Could they be at risk of vulnerability in older age, including social isolation, in ways that are different from local-born Singaporeans? Could more tensions arise in shared spaces that foreign and local-born seniors use due to poor intercultural understanding? Allow me to share examples from an ongoing qualitative study on aging immigrants and integration. My interviewees are foreign-born Singapore residents who are already citizens and PRs. Earlier in the life course, they had interacted with local Singaporeans at the workplace or through school-centered communities. After they enter into the empty nester stage and have retired, are these interactions sustained? The transnational ties of foreign-born Singapore residents may afford them some advantages, such as retirement options abroad, but most of my interviewees see their aging futures in Singapore. They appreciate its good medical and urban infrastructure, and their CPF and insurance policies are anchored in Singapore. Yet, their life worlds could be separated from other older Singaporeans. Instead of going to the active aging centres, some of them said they prefer to hire a domestic worker and seek help from co-migrants friends, because the AACs are predominantly Mandarin-speaking and assume a local-born Singapore identity. In another case, an interviewee, who is a widower in his 80s, expressed concern about who would provide practical and emotional care for him if he is critically ill, as his children have remigrated to the US and returned to Singapore only occasionally. It is time to broaden our imagination of what aging looks like in a super diverse society made up of new immigrant cultures represented by the foreign-born Singapore residents who are growing old alongside the local-born. Potential initiatives at the organizational level could include diversifying aging programs to support seniors with both local and transnational backgrounds. Enjoying or cooking food together could be one way for local and foreign-born seniors to share cultural experiences, or using role play to discuss myths and scenarios on local-foreigner relations. Activities like these provide new learning experiences and improve intercultural understanding in older age. We should also value the informal platforms that foster friendships and diversity in older age. In another project, I learned about a group of seniors who gather spontaneously at Jurong Lake Gardens to practice and learn Tai Chi from one another, generating an atmosphere of mutual learning and exchange. So tying together my first and second points, to conclude, I would like to emphasize that as Singapore progresses towards becoming a we society, we need to start giving attention to how migration impacts social cohesion in older age too. Seeing integration not in a snapshot, but as a lifelong process. It ensures as Singapore ages, we build support systems that work for a super diverse multicultural society like ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Next, we have Madam Sharani, and her question will be on, from your work on the ground, how do conversations about race, religion, and immigration unfold in practice? And what sentiments do you see emerging within communities today?
Harmony can exist without contact. Tolerance can exist without understanding. But fraternity, that requires relationship. It asks us to recognize that even when we differ in beliefs, identities, histories, and aspirations, we remain bound by a shared stake in Singapore's future. Good morning, everyone. Singapore today is more complex. We are older, more diverse, globally connected, and exposed to digital amplification of outrage and global crises such as the Gaza conflict that spill into local conversations. And tolerance, which, while often celebrated, is fragile. Without real relationships across differences, resentment persists beneath the surface. Social cohesion is not about sameness. It is about keeping differences relational rather than oppositional. And cohesion, it's not agreement. It is the capacity to stay in relationship despite the disagreements and to continue seeing one another as people, not proxies for communities or belief systems. One pattern we consistently see in Singaporeans today is that we are becoming more avoidant in person, that is. Many say that they're afraid to say the wrong thing, or they'll say, like, better not talk about race and religion, because that's polite. And politeness feels safe, but over time, it creates distance. Distance allows stereotypes to go unchallenged, differences to become abstractions, and trust to weaken. Fraternity erodes not only through conflict, but silence. As the founder and director of the White Hatters, I want to offer a practitioner's perspective, what fraternity looks like, not in policy documents, but in rooms, on football fields, and across tables where strangers decide whether to speak or to stay silent. The White Hatters was founded on a simple belief. Change. It starts with a conversation. Not a debate to win, not a lecture to persuade, but a conversation that allows people to be seen as individuals beyond labels and headlines. This brings me to the focus of our contribution today, the how. Across the White Hatters' work, we focus on the methods, platforms, and programs that intentionally create conditions for understanding across race, religion, and identity. Our work has focused on creating what we call engineered encounters, carefully curated spaces facilitated by trained practitioners who are equipped to navigate sensitive issues without allowing conversations to become defensive or polarizing. One of our flagship program initiative is Ask Me Anything, a moderated dialogue series relating to faith designed to make the sensitive questions askable. We don't ignore the elephant in the room. Many Singaporeans grow alongside people of other race and religion, yet never feel comfortable enough to even ask basic questions without fear of offending. As a result, misconceptions persist, not because of hostility, but because of silence. Ask Me Anything is designed to give Singaporeans and non-Singaporeans a safe space to ask candid questions about race, religion, and identity. Participants don't just learn about the beliefs, they discover lived realities. In everyday life, faith and culture intertwine, and questions about religion and race often reveal deeper insights into belonging, identity, and how people navigate differences. By normalizing curiosity and framing questions respectfully, these sessions reduce anxiety across racial and religious differences. They humanize individuals and replace assumptions with lived expectations and explanations. Participants often leave not with definitive answers, but with greater comfort engaging across religious and racial lines, an outcome that is critical in a multi-faith, multiracial, and multicultural society. Now, at one of our Ask Me Anything session, a couple of different faith and race attended sessions on Ask Me Anything Christianity and Ask Me Anything Islam as they considered marriage. And interestingly enough, they brought their parents along. They asked questions about religious practices, family expectations, and what a shared future might look like. They later told us that the most important thing was not having all the answers to the questions, but rather having that safe space to ask questions and the right people to ask questions to, without fear and without judgment. That is the outcome that we designed for. Ask Me Anything is not a one-off exchange of information. It is designed to create psychological safety and real relationships. Since its inception, more than 2,000 participants have taken part in sessions spanning faith, mental health, and geopolitically sensitive issues. The program has been referenced 3 times in Parliament, not because it avoids tension, but because it shows that tensions can be navigated responsibly. Ask Me Anything sessions work because it shifts people from fear to curiosity, from abstraction to relationship, and from silence to sustained everyday connection. That, ladies and gentlemen, is ultimately fraternity in practice. But fraternity does not only grow through conversation. Sometimes it begins with sweat, laughter, and a shared love of the game. One Football uses sports as an equalizer to bring Singaporeans and non-Singaporeans together through regular football training. There are no lectures on integration, no panels on harmony. People simply show up to learn to play the beautiful game of football. From the onset, One Football was designed as a series of immersive training sessions deliberately designed to encourage sustained interactions and exchanges aside from putting the participants through their paces. Along the way, they trade football stories and pick up local lingo like "pancit lah bro," "steady ah," "oi, don't kelong." And of course, the bad words. It's usually the bad words that get picked up first. They also pick up other languages too. But suffering together through a shared activity is not enough. We also encourage something very simple and very Singaporean. Going out after training for teh tarik and prata. I know, not the healthiest. But you see, nothing was forced. Yet over shared meals, conversations flowed. These informal moments became the bridge from activity to relationship. Now, one of our participants, an engineer from Myanmar, he's been here for 12 years. And according to him, he had never had any Singaporeans to play football with. Through One Football, he began forming friendships. What started as a football program, for him, became a doorway into the community. Now, the relationships did not end when the program ended. A group chat that we started in 2020 still remains active till today, with participants inviting each other to futsal games. Now, fraternity does not require constant intervention once trust has taken root. When people feel comfortable, seen, and included, relationships sustain themselves. Football offers a powerful model for social cohesion to emerge organically. And it is why we are running another iteration of One Football in April. So if you think you're up to it, come see me later. Now, fraternity also matters where many of us spend most of our waking hours, the workplace. Through Hello Kawan, localizing the global citizen, we work with organizations, including multinationals, to create facilitated spaces where colleagues can surface stereotypes and assumptions, not to shame, but to examine them together. Participants engage in guided conversations, gallery walk, and structured conversations that invite honesty rather than politeness. The goal is not to tell people what to think, but to reveal what often goes unnoticed in everyday interaction. So what emerges are not abstract discussions about diversity, but human stories about belonging or the lack of it. Now, in one session that we had with an MNC, and it's quite a big MNC in Singapore with a significant number of expats, one of the staff, a non-Singaporean staff member, shared that during lunch or coffee breaks, colleagues from the same nationality or race tend to sit together. No one was unkind or intentionally excluding him, yet he felt increasingly unwelcome, not because of what was said, but because of what was never offered. An invitation, a seat at the table, a sense of inclusion. Behavior that felt normal to him felt isolating. Behavior that felt normal to them felt isolating to him. Because belonging at the workplace is not a nice to have. Exclusion lowers engagement, reduces productivity, and can drive talent away, creating real costs for organizations. Fraternity, in this sense, has operational consequences. Now, our program helps teams translate awareness into practical changes, how meetings are run, how social spaces are navigated, and how inclusion is practiced beyond your formal statements. When people feel welcome, they stay. When they stay, they contribute, and when they contribute fully, organizations, including Singapore, are stronger for it. Our programs are not about persuading people, to think alike. They help people to see how their assumptions are formed and how these assumptions affect others in shared spaces. People change when something shifts internally, often quietly, sometimes unmeasurably, but enduringly. That is why we prioritize experiential engagement. Across our work, a consistent pattern emerges. People move from tolerance to curiosity, from curiosity to connection, and from connection to trust. Social cohesion is not built through grand gestures. It is through repeated, meaningful encounters that reshape how people see one another. And dialogue is sometimes dismissed as just talk. Yeah, we agree if it's just that. But that is why we, the White Hatters, adopt a dialogue to action approach. Participants reflect on what they heard, what shifted for them, and what they will do differently. because conversations shape behavior, not just attitudes. And dialogue matters not because it is expressive, but because it is formative. It changes how people act when no one is watching. At the White Hatters, our task is not to reduce differences, but to ensure that differences are held in relationship rather than allowed to polarize. This requires sustained investment in curated dialogue, shared activities, skilled facilitation, and spaces where difficult conversations can be navigated safely. And yes, our work is invisible. It requires sustained effort to build trust and address tensions before they harden into divisions, work that rarely produces immediate or dramatic outcomes. Yet this quiet labor is essential. Social cohesion underpins our ability to live together peacefully and respond collectively in times of crisis. It enables economic stability by fostering trust in institutions and workplaces, and it strengthens society by ensuring diversity does not become fragmentation. Precisely because it prevents conflict rather than reacting to it, the work of social cohesion is most effective when it goes largely unseen. But its absence is felt immediately. The work of social cohesion is slow, imperfect, and ongoing, but it is indispensable. Because in a world that is increasingly fractured, the ability to stay in conversation with one another may be our most important collective skill yet. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We have several questions here. I would like to check if anyone would like to ask a question before I read the questions that I have here.
There's a hand, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Paul Tambaya from NUS, but the question is my own. I asked this question last year, and I hope you don't mind if I'm going to ask the same question again, because the same kind of issues keep coming up. And the question is whether our immigration policy can be tweaked to encourage the immigration of people who have strong personal ties to Singapore or who are willing to make a contribution. For example, mums whose children are doing national service, instead of just following racial quotas. Thank you.
So, Minister.
Yeah, that's a government question.
Thanks very much, Dr. Tambaya. I mean, I wasn't here last year, so I don't know whether my answer is going to be exactly the same. But I want to say that our immigration policy is not just based on immigration quotas. That's not true. And in fact, it is a very comprehensive system a criteria that takes into account, indeed, when you have strong personal ties to people in Singapore. I deal with a lot of immigration appeals during my Meet the People sessions. In fact, I think about half of people who come in to see me are about that. And they always start by asking, can I have a letter from you as the MP to endorse my application? And my response is always that, well, it's more important for you to have a letter from somebody, a Singaporean who knows you well, who can vouch for you and say that you should be PR or Singaporean. Because he knows you well, he gives you the support, he thinks you should be part of the community. My letter will make no difference because really you are here because you're just my resident. And they accept that and they understand that. I think the important thing is that, as we talked about, in fact, all three of the panelists talked about, that when we want to bring people into our society through immigration, we must have a sense that they can integrate well, and that it's a two-way situation where Singaporeans must feel that they have the potential to integrate and can be Singaporean, and at the same time, the person coming in must also make his effort to understand what it means to be Singaporean and want to be. I think that's the basis for what, at the core of our immigration policy. The specific translation into criteria, it is a broad system that MHA manages and ICA manages, but I think the core spirit of immigration policy is that.
I wish that was true, because last year the panel admitted that these are noble goals, but ultimately the decision on is meant to preserve the current ethnic composition, and unfortunately the unintended consequence is a racial quota. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. We do have another question similar to this, but I would like to move on to maybe Professor Elaine. Professor Elaine, you spoke a little bit about the aging society as well as our super diverse society in Singapore, and how identity is not simply engineered by policy but shaped throughout everyday life. There is an interesting question here that's related to low birth rate that Minister spoke about, and how increased reliance on immigration reshape people's lived experiences of language, culture, and identity. And the question here is really, how do we ensure that we align our policies in terms of integration and belonging in line with this aging society that we are in? I think your research is looking into that. But the question here is also about how do we ensure that politically, in terms of our policies, when we have all these immigrants coming in, how do we ensure that they keep up to their language and that doesn't dilute our national, effort to integrate everybody?
Just to clarify the last part, how do they keep up with their language?
Yes, their own, because we have
that they maintain their own languages without diluting ours. Right. Okay, I think at the very premise of this question, in order to answer it, we have to agree that Singapore is a plural society, and the Singapore policies have encouraged the different ethnic groups to maintain their cultural identity and languages alongside sort of developing a more civic identity. And I would say that, in a sense, there is nothing that deters the new immigrants from retaining their own languages, as long as they are willing to speak in the common language alongside Singaporeans. In Singapore, most of it, I think, English is our lingua franca, but equally it could be also learning, Mandarin or Tamil or Malay. In fact, I'm ethnic Chinese, but my father speaks Malay fluently because he grew up in the generation where they learn Malay. And I think one of my greatest regrets was he never taught us how to speak Malay, because it would have been so useful, right? So I think, it's not, the issue here is not so much about whether or not immigrants get to retain their own languages, but alongside doing so, are they able to communicate with Singaporeans in English, in Singlish? And I think in particular when it comes to concerns over national identity and national community, Singlish is seen as something which can bridge the local-foreigner divide. So being able to understand simple Singlish, the terms, will help to break the ice, I think, in daily conversations.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Next, maybe to anyone else has got any questions? Yes, please. Yes.
Mine? Thank you very much. My name is Asad Latif. I'm a lapsed immigrant in the sense that I came in 1984 and consider myself quite Singaporean. My question revolves around a very interesting term that was used by one of the speakers, hierarchies of belonging. Okay. And I know that the speaker and others have mentioned how this whole immigrant experience is a fluid one that flows into nativist existence that is also fluid. So my question is, as you've done, you've looked at questions of race, of class, of how people feel accepted and what they should do to feel accepted. Can I please ask you to just think aloud and suggest how these hierarchies of belonging will shape up, let's say, 10 years from now? I know it's a rather broad question, but my point is that it's a very personal thing for me. I'm 68 years old, and I'm quite certain I shall die in Singapore, but I'm not certain exactly where in these evolving hierarchies of belonging I belong. So where will these hierarchies of belonging take us? Thank you.
I used the term, so maybe I'll just pass off. The term hierarchies of belonging came up from my research findings. My earlier research focused on new Chinese immigration to Singapore. And what really fascinated me about that research was over the years as Singapore developed a coherent or stronger sense of national identity, Singaporeans have started to differentiate the local-born Singaporeans presumably having more authentic Singapore identity from the newer immigrants. But one very interesting finding from that research project was the category of new immigrants is not a homogeneous one. So in fact, when I was doing my interviews, the new Chinese immigrants who came during the 1990s and early 2000s, they felt that they had become more Singaporean and integrated better than the newer recent arrivals. So this is what I mean by hierarchies of belonging, because here you have Singaporeans feeling that we are authentically Singaporean. Then you have the earlier cohorts of new immigrants who say, we have integrated better than the newer arrivals who are less willing to integrate. So this term hierarchies of belonging, I think, is meant to capture the very dynamic ways in which identity, belonging are sort of articulated in everyday discourse.
Thank you. Maybe I'll ask Sharani, because there is a question here that looks at conscious effort. It was interesting that you spoke about initiatives like One Football and Hello Kawan, and how this shows something as simple and universal, in terms of how games create reality and languages and all that. The question here is that, does conscious effort really strengthen religious and racial harmony when it can potentially create differentiation and divide, which may not be evident? So do we over-differentiate, this over-differentiate, does it cause identity confusion with interracial families, which are more common these days? And shouldn't we identify as Singaporeans rather than race?
Interesting. Okay, based on our experiences from the many sessions that we do on Ask Me Anything, whether it's race or religion, interestingly enough, about 30 to 40% of attendees would be non-Singaporeans. When they come and they ask questions, and because we created such a safe space for them to be able to ask questions, they're able to ask questions that you didn't think that they would ask, like, for example, why Malays are afraid of dogs. It's basic questions like this that are being asked that you don't normally talk about it in day-to-day conversation. And by giving this platform to kind of surface all this discomfort, all this curiosity in terms of the questions that they ask, I think it kind of brings people together. We're not talking about negotiating or compromising on your values, but rather coming to a common ground to understand when you see the other person as a person and not just a mere statistics or stereotype, there is a bridge that is formed, that's empathy that is exchanged during that conversation itself. Of course, there will be differences that will be surfaced, but it's how we manage differences, which is why it's very important that for our sessions, we have a skilled facilitator to navigate. I'll just give you an example. When we held the public discourse on the Gaza conflict, there was a lot of views that came in, and we expected these views, so we prep, we train our facilitators to expect any kind of questions so that they can moderate. And it was a very emotional session. About 150 people attended. People were crying at the end, and they all come from different views. There was pro, there was against. But I think it's very important to have these discussions and to have these discussions openly, because, as I mentioned earlier, if you don't talk about the discomfort, if you don't challenge the stereotypes, they're going to persist, and then we're going to live with each other superficially, and we are only tolerating each other when we should be actually accepting one another. So yes, our events will bring up the differences, but it is meant to have a shared understanding of what these differences are and how it relates back to us, particularly living in Singapore.
Right. So it's about awareness and understanding, and not just about race or religion or ethnicity.
Yes.
Is there
I want to support what she said.
Yes, please.
We didn't coordinate our speeches, but I briefly mentioned my Sunday football team in my speech. And I want to just tell you that it's absolutely true that when I think you used the term, go through suffering together, you build a common bond, and you start to see beyond what predefined, I think, definitions of what you should be. And I mean, I have had many Sunday league teams over the course of my life. This is one thing I sadly have had to give up doing this job, because now I can't kick anybody without apologizing. But I still keep in close contact with many of them. I mean, I have WhatsApp chats with them. We go out for a meal together whenever we can. And it's largely because we just have been 22 people, or, well, 15 people standing in the field together, kicking around a ball for 2 hours. That's all we did. And if the more opportunities we can create to do these things, deliberate, conscious, sometimes organic, but mostly create the opportunities to do it, I think we'll be in a better place. I know David is coming for the next session later. You should ask him to create more soccer fields for people to play.
Yeah. Can I also just jump in on this? And I think negotiating differences has been part of the Singapore journey from the very start. So the conversations we're having now about local-foreigner relations are actually not unusual in the journey of Singapore. And when we think about what are the levers, platforms that can be used to bridge differences, we should be thinking about hobbies, interests. For example, cooking, enjoying food together, football, these are all ways for people to bond in natural ways, which is why also in my speech earlier I emphasized the importance of these informal friendships in diversity, that sometimes, not everything has to be structured, programmed, and we need that kind of spaces, sports, fields, void decks, welcoming void decks that are, I'm afraid to say some of the newer design HDB blocks, their void decks tend to be quite dark, not so open, whereas the older design ones, it's a welcoming space. So as we design Singapore, we also need to think about building these kinds of actual spaces where people can just get together informally.
Do you have a question? Yes. Yes, please.
Hi, hi, I'm Nicole Tan from Daman High. So first, I would like to thank all the speakers for the very insightful sharing. So, Minister, just now you mentioned that we need to accept newcomers and help them feel accepted. So before I share my question, I would like to share an observation that I've had. So I stay at Paya Lebar. And at Paya Lebar, many foreign workers will go there to picnic at the pathways outside malls. So while this could be a part of their culture, it has resulted in obstruction for many of the people who would just like to go to the malls there. So my question is, where exactly do we draw the boundary between the assimilation of the migrants to our culture and the acceptance of their culture? Thank you.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. First of all, very good that young people are interested in these questions, because ultimately what Singapore is going to be is really in your hands. I think the issue of sharing common space is not limited to a foreign local dichotomy. You remember recently we had this strange burst of news on the dancers in where is it? I keep accidentally saying it, but it's a marina. I think the City Link area. Is that correct?
Yes.
Bayfront. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't want to get it wrong, because Esplanade was also previously a place where young people also congregated, and well, eventually lots of debate about whether or not there was congestion versus people wanting to do something social there. And fortunately, SMRT stepped in and created a new space for the dancers. I haven't gone to check it out yet, so I should go and see. But I think there will be a need, as Elaine mentioned, for us to be deliberate in creating social spaces for people to come together. We do have a large number of migrant workers, including foreign domestic workers, and during the off days, they will have they will need a place to go to hang out. And what we ought really to do is to see whether or not we can integrate better by having more of a shared space rather than enclaves. It's not always possible, but the fact that they are within, I think, areas where Singaporeans generally frequent or traverse is not a bad thing. Where, I shouldn't review where I live, but okay, where where roughly I live, there is a area, common area, where there is a elderly facility, senior care facility run by the NTUC. Big facility. They are using an old bus interchange. And during weekends, it's the same thing. The foreign domestic workers go there and they hang out. Some of them from other parts of Singapore, I would think. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, it's just a day in the week. You get the chance. It becomes very lively because there's music, there's, they're eating there, they're partying. It makes the place lively, and you know what? The old people there actually, the Singaporeans enjoy it, I think. Yeah. Some of them. They sit there and they watch them dance and they watch the performances. Is that something we want to stop? I think it's something we should encourage.
Thank you, Minister, for that. Is there another question from the floor? Maybe the one at the back?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Darius Lee, Executive Director of non-profit organization Cultivate SG. Now, as we all know, Singapore is projected to become a super-aged society this year, with at least 21% of the population reaching the age of 65 years and above. So my question is to all panelists. What are your thoughts and experiences when it comes to intergenerational differences, such as in workplace, in public life, in private life? And do you think that we should start talking about intergenerational relationships or differences as a kind of potential fault line when talking about social cohesion? And what do you think can be done about it?
So, interesting question, perhaps.
Oh, maybe I'll take. Hi, Darius. Good to see you. Okay, we have seen this. In fact, I was just having a short discussion with Elaine that a lot of the initiatives that we see out there on social cohesion and in bridging intergenerational differences tend to be on the youth. What happened to the non-youth like us, right? We still hold our views, and I think it's also important to reach out and to have programs specifically for non-youth, because you have to bear in mind, stereotypes, they get passed down. And I think it's important to have this conversation, to have activities for the non-youth so that we can at least make an attempt to change their perspective on things, and then, in fact, guide them on how to interact with younger people. In the conversations that we've had, a lot of the youth, they have very different views on things, and it's very important to be able to bridge that gap. So I feel, and we were talking about it, that we should be having a lot more activities to be able to bridge that gap. I don't know, Darius, I mean, you know the work that we do, and you've seen that, in the dialogues that we have, we try to include everyone, not just the youth. I hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
So if I can just add to that, I think as part of what I had shared earlier, I do research on migration and aging policy in Singapore. I would really love to see our active aging centres holding conversations like this. So one of the feedback that I hear sometimes in the aging space is there's a certain demographic that goes to the active aging centres, right? And the sort of more well-educated, older Singaporeans, they don't necessarily want to go to the active aging centres because it's just about singing karaoke, doing Zumba dance, etc. And from my own personal friendships with older Singaporeans as well, I find that they still want to remain stimulated through conversations like this, right? About what does it mean to be living in a super diverse society. And I think that being able to open these discussions on local-foreigner relations amongst our seniors can help to also address some of the more negative prejudices that they may have had from their earlier years, which they carry over, to kind of their senior years as well. Another opportunity, I'm a mother of a 5-year-old, so I remember when my child was younger, there were a lot of opportunities for parents to get together, and sometimes in place of the parents, because parents have to work, so we can't always go to the school's activities in the middle of the workday. So it's the grandparents who come instead. So when you talk about intergenerational spaces, right, actually schools are potentially, especially preschools, are a great space for children and older Singaporeans to get together. So the school that my child goes to happens to be quite an international one. So you get to see grandparents, from different nationality backgrounds as well. So that's another opportunity. And perhaps we need to be a little bit more expansive in terms of how we think about how integration conversations can be carried out across the life course at different life stages. Instead of, I think primarily the focus has been on young people, and important as they are, there's a bigger range of people living in Singapore.
Minister, do you have anything to add? Okay, so maybe along that line, there is an interesting question here about aging population that I thought maybe we should discuss, about how caregivers, our most intimate, sharing our most intimate family spaces, yet often deeply isolated from the broader community. So how do we move beyond a transactional relationship to ensure meaningful social inclusion for the health of our families and our social fabric, alongside other conversations of lifelong migrant integration?
So this is a question on domestic workers, right?
Yes, correct.
Migrant workers working in the families. Maybe I can start off because I did have a previous research project that looked at the relations between domestic workers and the seniors that they are working for. And so this question is about how do we ensure their meaningful social inclusion. I would say in most of the cases that we did study, the domestic workers tend to be seen as a paid caregiver, performing a more functional role. But in some of the case studies that we came across, there were deeper, richer relationships between the senior, who is the employer, and the domestic worker. And this is usually the case when the employer actually shows interest or has concern over the domestic workers' sort of extended relationships. So for example, supporting the domestic worker through receiving caregiver training in Singapore so that she can improve her skill set, or for instance, when they know about the domestic workers' family situations, like there's a medical crisis back in Indonesia or Myanmar, the employer actually helps out. So these kinds of relationships that are more sort of cohere because of emotional interest in one another's lives, they tend to go beyond the transactional. But of course, this is very much dependent on individual employers. So maybe a way of looking at this in a more structured way is how do we educate our employers to realize that the domestic workers are fulfilling a very important role in terms of caring for our aging communities. And they are not just employees, they are actually, human beings, with their personal interests, aspirations, as well as families back home. So I think it's a process of education to do with the migrant worker and employer relationship.
I think this is a very complex problem. I guess just to set the context for this, you would know that there is a huge diversity in terms of the employers and also the employees. Today, it is, government does keep the threshold for being a foreign domestic worker employer quite low, because we recognize that families have needs, and that we do want to support, say for example, the spouses going to work. We want to make sure that the elderly and the children at home are well taken care of, and sometimes full-time care is really the only model that can work. And so MOM is fairly liberal when it comes to allowing people to become employers. At the same time, the diversity of the foreign domestic worker in terms of the employee, the source for where they come from, is also very diverse. You have Filipinos, but you also have people who come from Myanmar, who maybe first-time foreign domestic workers, and so they are coming to a new country, a new environment, a new situation where we have never encountered before, and the cultural cultural gap is significant. And there's also a diversity of tasks. Don't forget, because in the beginning we used to use a lot of them for childcare, but now increasingly elderly care, disabled care, the tasks are also changing. And so it is a very complex problem. I think what we try to do in the government is to manage the regulations at the bottom end to make sure there is a minimum standard in terms of care for the foreign domestic worker, in terms of their rest hours, and we raise these regulations over time. And after much debate, we have introduced compulsory rest days for the foreign domestic worker. And I think over time, we want to continue to raise the standards so that we make sure that the workers that come are treated well and they have a ability to do their work well here. At the top end, it is, I think, as Elaine said, we need to continue to educate employers that this is not just a transactional relationship. You are really bringing in a human being from another country, and you have a responsibility to also take care of the human being. And so where we can use best case examples, where we make sure the employer goes through some training, we try very hard to do that. But it is a very difficult problem. At the end of the day, it boils down to individuals. There will always be edges, marginal cases where things don't go well. But I think we continue to press as far as possible, both on the regulatory side, but also on the education side, to try to shift our standards. For you look at other countries, they've done it. I mean, in some countries like Japan and Hong Kong, I think there is a recognition that the employers there have maybe a higher standard, and is something that the foreign domestic workers do recognize, and they go there, they get paid better, they have a better life. But I think we have we started from a very different time, very different base. I think we continue to improve ourselves going forward.
Thank you, Minister.
I'm just going to add in, just from a practitioner's perspective, I think because we come from the social cohesion lens, we actually had this program called Cook to Connect, where we got the participants to cook curry debal or curry devil, which is a very authentic Eurasian dish. And we got the migrant workers to pair up with local Singaporean in a group of 4, so 2-2, and they cooked together using the recipe that we did. I know this is a very simplistic approach, but it actually works, because when they get together and during the whole process of cooking this dish, they are being peppered with questions like, oh, what's the curry, what's your favorite curry like, And then I realized, oh my God, there's a lot of curries, and not all curry you actually use, curry spice. So that was interesting, and the conversation moved from something that was very generic about cooking, what was life like when you were growing up, to something much more personal. And when foreign domestic workers or the caregivers and the family members actually work together, they actually get to interact that's beyond a transactional relationship when it happens at home. They get to know one another in a more personal capacity. And by knowing, I think it's when you know somebody more intimately that the relationships can be better. And at the end, people were like hugging and taking pictures. And I hope it means that the relationship moving forward is not just something that's transactional, but something that is imbued in empathy and understanding. So while we talk about policy and research and all that points to a certain direction, I think on the ground, we need to continually come up with activities that draw people together, Singaporeans and non-Singaporeans, because when you are doing something together, it's where you have that opportunity to get to know one another. And I think, it sounds very simple, but it's actually very important. Yeah.
So it's more experiential and activity-based,
Yes.
rather than just, trying to get to know them on a superficial level. Thank you for that. I think there is a question from the gentleman over there.
Hello, Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. My name is Ataul Kudus. I'm from Ahmadiyya Muslim community. Being a minority organization, we also face immigrations from our members coming from various countries, and we face problems in doing programs for them to integrate with our society. And we face a wide spectrum from the expats to the migrant workers, domestic workers. So, and as we know that my community is just a small, then what do you suggest that activities that we could do to help them integrate because they have the same religious identity as us, but unfortunately they don't have the same cultural identity as us. So maybe you can suggest, the panel can suggest some form of activities that we have food stall every week, every fortnightly we have food stall together. But in the end, some people got injured. So, so all this we are facing. And anyway, we are just a small community, and it's very difficult for us to get the resources to manage the differences in this spectrum of migrant workers. We're trying our best. Please help us also. Thank you.
Right. So it's about assimilation of this particular community. Any suggestions from the panel?
Yeah, actually, thank you for asking that question. I understand the challenges that your community feel. That is why when we have that session on Ask Me Anything on Islam, we make sure that we present the diverse views of the various people in the faith, you know. But I think in terms of the activities, you mentioned futsal. We have one football, and one of the criteria that we have is that 30% of registrants must be non-Singaporean. It's a criteria. So when we put you in a group, we make sure there's that balance, or rather 70% Singaporean, 30% non-Singaporean. And it must be engineered so that, you know, people don't just come to play football, they come to train. We put them through the paces, you know, when they do their warm-up, we ask several questions. And as silly as it may sound, but the first session that we had, we made, and actually all the sessions, we made everybody use name tags. Who uses name tag during football training? Nobody, but we made that because we want them to get to know each other on a more personal basis. I think cooking is great to get people together, because as you're doing that, you are learning from one another. You know, there's a lot of activities, but I think for us, we believe that we must connect, create, collaborate. We can't go far alone, so we always look at other organizations that share the same values as us to go further together. Oh my God, it sounds so cliche, but yes, that's what we do. So I'm sure there are a lot of organizations. I'll be happy to have a chat with you after this to see whether I can connect you with other organizations.
I think on the topic of migrant workers, it's worthwhile taking a step back a little bit, because insofar as relating that to social cohesion, it is important for us to make sure that they are well settled in our society. But I think the migrant workers we are talking about, a lot of them are here on a transient basis, that they are here because they want to spend their economic lives here, make a good living, support their families back home. Many of them actually do not have the intention to settle here. And so we have to take a broader view in the sense that we want to make sure that their lives here are good, but it's a different sort of consideration when it comes to, say, immigration policy. You know, we're not thinking about them as necessarily future citizens. Some of them may want to be, but that's not the ultimate purpose. So in some ways, I think we have been trying to improve that over time. There was a big step jump in terms of how government has been trying to improve the conditions for migrant workers, particularly after COVID-19, the pandemic, where we thought we needed to do more to make sure that they are safe and they are well managed, and that the way we were doing, say, for example, housing for the foreign workers, we needed to push the standards up. And this is what MOM has been doing. They have set up a new division, well, some time ago, not new anymore, that looks specifically at migrant workers, and they work with dormitories, with, I think, associations or organizations such as yours to support activities that directly help to manage the migrant workers. These include the mosques, who I know they work very closely with to run activities so that on the weekends when the migrant workers have a free day, they go there and they are able to do that. These include also recreation centers that we are building. I think we have to build more, and we will in time, but these are facilities that are dedicated to the foreign workers, and some of their needs are quite different from Singaporeans. You know, they play kabaddi, I think. That's the game that we don't really play, or cricket.
Cricket.
Yeah. And I think they have specialized courts in the recreational centers just for them. So these are all things that we are doing. I think we can continue to do more.
Thank you, Minister, for that.
Thank you.
I think there is one more question at the end, please. Yes.
Hello.
Over there.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm Alami, and I'd like to ask Minister, politically, where the idea of the Singapore is heading towards to. I ask this because the idea seems productive, but it is impossible, the most very difficult to achieve. I'm reminded what Mr. Lee Kuan Yew said in a dialogue in the year 2000, that we are not set out to be one people, one country, one Singapore. And he hits the nail on its head. It's very profound, because from the perspective of theory, the idea of the nation state is based on the existence of a culturally homogeneous society. And that's where the state gets its sovereignty, its legitimacy, from the cultural homogen. But we are not set out that way. We are multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious. So in terms of nation building, Minister, minorities, however hard they try, and however hard the majority try, there is a kind of disconnect between minorities, majority, and nation building. More so with immigrants, whom countries and states see them as aliens representing a culture of some other country. So I want to, really, ask you, Minister, although it's nice to say Singapore, we always preach this and we always sing this song, I really do not think that it is something workable, and I believe that moving on the next 40, 60 years for Singapore, we need to remodel our whole idea of nation building. I think we got to move away, from race, religion, ethnicity, because, the whole idea of a nation based on cultural homogeneous society is a Western construct. The idea of nation state is based on culturally homogeneous society, but we are not like the West. We are different. So, can we challenge ourselves, Minister, next 40, 60 years? Remodel, how do we need to do our nation building? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alami.
Thank you, Dr. Alami. That's a very difficult question. But very good to see you again. It's been a while. I agree with you, actually, on many counts, that this journey to become a Singaporean, Singapore is a very difficult one. And it's an unending one, as I think both Elaine and Joanne have talked about. Because the parameters are evolving, the world is evolving, things are moving very fast. To continue moving together is an unending task. I mentioned the IPS survey in my speech, where 1/3 of Singaporeans feel that the national identity is the defining characteristic of their identity, but the rest of us don't think of it that way. And we have to keep working at it. I don't know what you have in mind for remodeling, but I think it is important for us to think about the problem in that Singapore is actually quite unique in the world. We are, the fact that we are multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural, and we have been able to maintain harmony for such a long time. I think that is a tremendous success, and it's tremendous. It's not by coincidence, and it's a deliberate effort. And we have to continue. I think that speaks to the success of our methods. I don't think it is something we need to knock ourselves badly on, that we have not succeeded in making everybody feel Singaporean. So we have to keep working at it. I think what we have today is unique. It is also fragile, and it can quite easily go away if we are not careful. And what we do want to do is indeed to have regular discussions like this, to think about what is the way to do it going ahead. And that's where I really like what Shawani said earlier. I'm going to bring up her quote again. I wanted to finish it for my conclusion, but she said that social cohesion is built not through grand gestures, but through repeated, meaningful encounters that shape how we see each other or one another. And all of us have a role to do this. It is not the job of the government to do this. It's not the job of anybody top down to do this. It's the job of each and every one of us to make this happen. And I think if we can recognize that it's something that is important to us, we all keep working at it, we'll have a chance to keep Singapore harmonious and keep this beautiful place that we have alive.
Thank you, Minister. We would need to conclude this panel because we don't have a lot of time left. I think one message that stands out really is that harmony in Singapore is neither accidental nor static, right? And it is built intentionally, patiently, and also collectively, and across policies, places, and people's everyday life. So on that note, I would like to ask the three panelists if you have any, remarks to conclude this dialogue before we end. We have about 2 minutes left.
Okay, for me, it's really simple. I want you to turn to the person on your left or your right. I don't know whether you've introduced yourself. Can you do that now and say, hi, my name is...
Wow.
From today, you can ask me any question about my race or religion and I won't feel offended. This is my number. Text me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Professor.
very good. Now you've all gotten to know one another. Maybe I'll just chime in here with my takeaway thoughts. So after I had shared about hoping to see that the AACs actually foster conversations like the one we just had, I'm wearing my Apple Watch, and someone from a social service agency whom I know has just texted me and said that her social service agency would be very glad to take forward these conversations. So I think this is really action, and as Minister said, the kind of conversations we have here today, it's just a starting point, and many of you here are industry leaders in your own capacities. So we hope that you will take on board some of these suggestions and implement them in your workspaces or in the social spaces that you're helping to manage.
Thank you. Well, I used up my conclusion, so I'm just going to say that, well, first of all, I learned a lot from Elaine and Shawani today. I also learned a lot from the questions that we have today. But the gist of it is this, that we are all in this together. We are a very small country, 3.5 Singaporeans, citizens, and it's all individual responsibility to make this beautiful country work. And I feel this is my responsibility, and the fact that I have so many of you in this room with me discussing these issues of great importance, existential importance to Singapore, is a blessing for all of us. And so thank you very much for the time. Thank you very much for having the opportunity to discuss this with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.